Greetings. Welcome to episode 2 of Indiana's Timeless Tales. The series currently comprises 5 books, with a sixth in the final stages of production, that tell the story of Indiana from prehistory until the end of the American Revolution. This episode chronicles the immense forest that covered the state at the time of American penetration into the region. The podcast necessarily omits some information from the printed volume, so those interested in all the material, you can find it in the book Indiana's Timeless Tales, Prehistory to 1781. Indiana forests. At the time of settlement, vast hardwood forests covered most of Indiana. More than 85 species of trees live in the state. Trees like white oak, sugar maple, white ash, American beech, sycamore, red oak, yellow poplar, and black cherry grew to a large size. Many have said that a squirrel could have traveled from Ohio to the Illinois prairies without ever touching the ground. The canopy of this forest was dense. The natives that lived in the region would not have seen sunrise or sunset due to the dense foliage. Even during midday, sunlight would penetrate to the ground only in patches, allowed by breaks in the foliage. The horizon was invisible except for the rare pinnacles towering over the landscape. The only land not covered by forest would have been an area in the northwest region of the state. Here, the vast midwestern prairies began and stretched west to the Mississippi River and beyond. Clearing the land. After arriving at their land, the first task facing a pioneer family was to begin clearing the trees from it. This process might take several years to complete. However, their initial needs were not great. The farmer would begin cutting trees using a felling axe or a double-bit axe. Cutting one huge tree would consume many hours, and after it was down, the farmer would cut off the limbs for use as firewood using a crosscut saw. If there were 2 men, they used a 2-handled crosscut. Otherwise, he used a 1-man crosscut to work the limbs into smaller pieces for use in the fireplace. They would pile the brush up for use in the next task. This left the huge trunks of the trees lying on the ground. Most of these were too big to deal with as firewood, but they had to be removed. Farmers, after they had several trees down, would band together with other farmers and hold what they called a log rolling. Log rollings. Several families would gather together at a farm for this task. The women worked preparing food while the men gathered in the log rollings. Several families would gather together at a farm to participate in this task. The women worked preparing food while the men gathered in the log field for the work at hand. Boys had the task of filling water buckets to slake the thirst of the working men. Girls helped prepare the vast quantity of food required for the calorie-burning task the men performed. They formed into teams, usually 8 men to a team. They would try to match up the men so all men on a team were of similar height. 4 men lined up on each side of the log. They laid 4 stout poles, usually hickory or log, called hand spikes, perpendicular to the log, which had been cut into about 10-foot length. They would then roll the log onto the handspike. After deciding the log's destination, they would then grasp the handspikes and pick up the log. These logs were still green with sap and quite heavy. Using this process, they would form the logs into piles of several logs. Once they had piled the logs, they would pile brush up against them and set them on fire. These fires would burn for many days, covering the land with an acrid, heavy smoke. The farmer would have to visit the piles from time to time, moving unburned portions of logs into the fire so all would be consumed. Stumps. The stumps now remained. Removing stumps was also a laborious task performed with an axe and grubbing axe. Many times the farmer would leave the stumps in the ground to rot for a few years, farming around them. Eventually, though, they would have to grub out the stump, a process that might consume most of the day for a large tree. Clearing the land took place during the winter months when they had fewer farming chores. Clearing a 40-acre farm might take several years. Crops. At first they would grow enough vegetables and hay to provide food for the table and hay for the livestock. As they cleared more land, they could stop crops. At first they could grow enough vegetables and hay to provide food for the table and hay for the livestock. As they cleared more land, they could begin to grow corn and wheat for sale. Common vegetable crops included cabbage, carrots, potatoes, turnips, and beans. All of these vegetables could be stored in a root cellar or dried for later use. They would make cabbage into sauerkraut, a nutritious food that would keep for several months in a cool place. They would also grow hay and oats for the livestock and corn for the meal. A crop of wheat provided flour for bread and served as a cash crop.
Valuable resource. The trees formed a valuable resource. The pioneer's first home was usually a log cabin constructed from trees cut on the land. Log barns, smokehouses, and grain bins soon followed. Sawmills appeared along the streams at first as they needed the energy of flowing water to power the saws that they used to cut the logs into boards. The fine quality of Indiana hardwoods formed the basis of the state's first industries. Furniture factories that turned out tables, chairs, cupboards, and a host of other products. Spring wildflowers. The forest contained scores of spring blooming wild plants that brought beauty to the spring woodlands. Spring blooming wildflowers like Virginia bluebells, wild geranium, Jacob's ladder, bloodroot, Dutchman breeches, and wild ginger covered the forest floor with a lush carpet of color. Summer and fall wildflowers. By summer, the thick leaf canopy meant the end of most of the forest-dwelling wildflowers. However, there were breaks in the forest caused by storms, fires, and other events. Areas along the rivers and streams also had their own colorful inhabitants. Scores of species of wild plant bloomed in these open areas blessed with more sun than the forest floor. Many of these provided nectar for insects and forage for wild animals. Native summer and fall blooming wildflowers like butterfly weed, wild columbine, purple coneflower, showy goldenrod, New England aster, spiderwort, and black-eyed Susans ignited the summer and fall countryside with their blazing color. Indiana fauna. The wildlands of Indiana were home to an abundant population of wild animals living on the land, in the streams, and in the air. Rivers and streams. The waterways of the state abounded with fish. Bluegill, bass, crappie, and many species of catfish inhabited the creeks and rivers. These and other edible fish provided a valuable addition to the pioneer diet. Forests and prairies. Many of the state's first explorers were fur traders that traded goods for fur-bearing animal like beaver, mink, otter, and fox with the Indians. Many other animals like white-tailed deer, wild turkey, raccoon, rabbits, and opossum roamed through the forest floor. Squirrels frolicked in the trees, and many species of bats flitted through the evening twilight. Predators like cougar, bobcat, and wolves preyed on many of these animals as well as the settlers' livestock. In the air. Songbirds. Indiana settlers found a home that teemed with songbirds, hawks, owls, and other feathered inhabitants. Ducks, geese, and other waterfowl swam on the waters. Reptiles. Settlers also found abundance of snakes, turtles, and other reptiles, some of which were poisonous. Frogs, salamanders, and other amphibians round out the list of wild animals found in the state. For a complete list of animals that were found in the state at the time of settlement, go to the website www.indianawildlife.org.
Find out more about Indiana history by purchasing the book Indiana's Timeless Tales, Prehistory to 1781. The book includes the early history of Indiana from the time the glaciers melted until the final days of the Revolutionary War. The book includes sketches on native tribes that inhabited the state as well as the French outposts established during colonial times. You can find it on my website, www.mossyfeetbooks.com, on the Indiana Timeline series. Just scroll down to the categories, click on that section, and they're all there. There's 5 books. There are links to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Google Play, and other online booksellers. You may choose to purchase the book in audiobook, ebook, or softbound versions. The audiobook version is available on Google Play. At the conclusion of this series, I will compile the episodes into an audiobook. The audiobook will be available on Audible, Amazon, Apple, Barnes & Noble, as well as many other audiobook sellers. I also produce a video version of these podcasts on YouTube and Rumble. Just search for Mossy Feet Books on either of those platforms. You can also order the books direct from me, the author, on the webpage. If you wish me to sign the book, just send an email to mossyfeetbooks@gmail.com requesting a signed book and instructions on how you want me to address it. Note, you will receive an email if you send me an email, I will add you to my contact list. Readers on the list will receive an email from me announcing when I publish a new book. If you do not want me to add you to the list, tell me and I will not add you. Listeners to this podcast that want email notifications of my new releases can just send an email requesting addition to the list. You can choose to have your name removed at any time. If you browse the website, you will find dozens of sample chapters, one for each of my books. I hope you enjoyed this podcast.